Hello everyone, welcome to another lesson with Rivera Fine Art Studios. Today I want to talk about comparative measuring. If you've watched my previous lessons, I discussed sight size measuring, which is a technique where you draw the object in the exact scale that you see it. With comparative measuring, you have the freedom to change the scale. So I can make the object much larger on my paper than it appears, or much smaller. So today I will be working from the setup of this vase. Now what I've done is I've created a grid on a piece of transparent plastic to help demonstrate ways to measure. Though you want to train your eye to be able to do this without a grid. What this grid tells me is if I look at this shape of the rectangle, if I put these two squares together, it creates a rectangle that is exactly twice the height that it is the width. And I can use the line here, the dividing line, the halfway point, to see exactly where the middle of this vase is. Now it's pretty close to where the base of the vase and the neck of the vase separate, just a little bit below that point. So if I were to measure this, what I would do is find my two widest points. So I'm going to use the tip of the pencil and my thumb, and I'm going to align that with the two widest points, which in this case are those two curves that touch the edges of my lower box. Establish that, and then I can use that as my unit of measurement. So now I can take that proportion that I have and check it against the height of my vase, and I can see that it is exactly 2. So how can I transfer that information over to my paper? So what I can do is decide whether or not I want this to be larger, same size, or smaller. I'm going to make it larger. So I am going to simply mark out where I want the top and the bottom of this vase to be. Now, I just chose those marks arbitrarily. So the positioning of those marks, I just, I look at my paper and I see where I want to position that vase within my paper. I don't have to do it at exactly the same height that I'm seeing it like I would with a sight size technique. The next thing that I then like to do is put a center line in here. This tells me that this will be the center of my vase, and it will help me to work out my contour lines. It will help me to make everything symmetrical. I can also use this center line almost like a ruler. So I can find my halfway point based on the center line. I could simply take my fingers if I wanted to and check. So let's say that's about half. Let's just make sure. I bring that up here. I'm a tad short, a little bit bigger. I'd say that's probably half right there. So again, you just can use your fingers, you can eyeball it. If I want it to be more specific, I could take my thumb and the tip of the pencil, just as I did on the actual still life. Measure that proportion from that bottom line to that point that I just marked, and compare that to the space from there to my top line. And that is an exact center point. So something else I should mention here is that I'm keeping my lines very loose and light. That just allows me to make adjustments more easily. I don't want to be too locked into anything this early on. I want to be able to adjust the drawing as I go. So now that I have this halfway point marked out, I can use that as my width proportion, right? Because we said the height of this vase was 2 times what the width was. So I could simply measure this again with my thumb and the tip of the pencil. I could take that measurement, turn it sideways, and that gives me my width proportion. Okay, so now I've gone ahead and I've lightly marked that on my paper. So now I'm going to just go ahead and put this into my imaginary box. This is the box that indicates the outside perimeters that I will eventually put my vase into. Another term that's used to describe this is the envelope. There we go. Okay, so now if I needed to, I could always adjust my center line if it looks a little bit off center. I just measure these spaces. And yeah, I can see, I can probably come over here a little bit. But you see, this is exactly why it's good to keep those lines light and loose in the beginning, because now I can easily adjust my line. Just a little bit more pressure, indicate that darker indication is where I want that center line to be. Measure it one more time. That's halfway now. Dimension from here to here is the same as from here to here. Okay, so now I am just going to create one more line moving through the center of the object this way, horizontal line. Okay, a little wobbly, but close enough. Again, don't worry about these lines being perfect. They're really just to guide you. You want to try to get close, but you don't have to be perfectly straight. In fact, you can't make them perfectly straight unless you have a ruler. So now I just want to measure one more time this height proportion. So is my horizontal line exactly halfway? And I would say it is pretty darn close. Okay, now comes the next step. So here is where measuring my object is going to be very important. A few decisions I want to make. I want to figure out where the two widest points are. They're just slightly below that horizontal center line. I also want to figure out where this little indentation is, where the body of the vase and the neck of the vase separate, a little bit above my center line. So, how do I do that? If you guessed measuring, you're right. So the first thing I want to do actually now is just looking at this shadow, where the shadow begins here. I want to check and see if that's in the center of the vase. So if I measure from the left edge of my box into that line, and then I compare that space to the other side, it is about the same. So that is a center line. Now I can measure from the right edge of my box to where that indentation is, get that unit of measurement, and then come across. I have 1, 2, about 3. 3 of these little spaces will fill in this white space from the contour edge of my vase to where that shadow begins. Let me just check that one more time to be sure. Such a small fraction. I have 1 here, we're not counting that one. So now we're coming in, that's 1 there. That's actually the first 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so I've just gone ahead and I've marked that out on my paper. So I'm telling myself that that indentation falls somewhere in here. I don't know the height yet, so I'm just putting a line. And the space from here to here, I have 3 more of those, here to here, here to here, to get to that where that shadow would be. Okay, so now I could do the same thing to figure out the height. So if I want to think about, in relationship to the center line here, where this part of the vase starts to curve out. So basically where this indentation occurs, I can check it against the height of this box. And I can do that with measurements. So I'm going to do that very quickly. Okay, so I measured 10. So I've gone ahead and carefully marked out where a tenth of this would be on my paper. And then I've just drawn a line right across because I know that both sides are the same. I also measured out this side, broke this side up into quarters. So now I know that this will be the same width on both sides. A simpler way to do this would be to just one more time check my measurement from that point to my center line and compare it. Okay, so I'm going to speed up the rest of this video. I'm going to do a time lapse, but I'm going to continue to do measurements, mark out points, and try to finish at least getting the contour shape of this vase established. Okay, so just very quickly, I want to talk about a little bit of what I did. Now, I will continue to tweak this a little bit because certain things are just not quite lining up the way I'd like. I have to recheck my construction lines. But when I'm drawing something that is symmetrical like this, once I figure out all of my dimension on one side, I can figure it out on the other side. I can just take those same measurements and bring them right over. So for example, when I was measuring each one of these spaces, and I can use this line as my ruler line, so I was checking the proportion from the edge of my box to this point, then I was checking the spacing from that point to this point, and then from this point to this point. I was doing that for my widths as well as my heights. So using, once again, this line, I could check the height coming off of that line to where that would be. Same there, and then this pretty much touched the bottom. Okay, stay tuned for lesson 2 of comparative measuring.